It's taken for granted nowadays that liberal democracy is the most desirable form of government. The fall of the Soviet bloc nearly 3 decades ago is seen as a triumph of democracy over totalitarianism, and has led to people like Francis Fukuyama famously turning Marx on his head and declaring capitalism to be the end of history. But where does liberal democracy actually come from? How does a country get to this stage? An idealist, that is someone who believes in the primacy of ideas in shaping human history, will probably say that liberal democracy comes from the liberal goals of the Enlightenment era. But if political development is reducible to ideological development, then why are poor capitalist countries so often lacking in democratic governance? Clearly, material conditions are the major variable here. So what is the materialist basis for a liberal democracy? In CGP Gray's video, Keys for Rulers, Gray explains that political power is maintained by satisfying enough people that you need to support you. He called these people keys to power. In an advanced industrialized country, the keys to power are spread out due to the diversification of the economy. Having multiple competing interests leads to a pluralistic democratic form of government that's needed to mediate between them. But in an underdeveloped country without a diverse economy, rulers can often rule by appealing to the military alone, leading to constant military coups. Or there might be one industry that dominates the whole economy, and thus the easiest way to rule is to cater to that one industry. But even more important than competing interests is how willing these different interests are to compromise. In liberal democracies, there's usually a broad consensus across society that the elected government has legitimate sovereignty over the country, and that the authority of this government should be respected. But there are other certain fundamental things that the majority of society has to agree on. Things that can't be changed by simple elections or constitutional amendments. In order to maintain a liberal democratic form of government, the majority have to consent to the economic mode of production, since it is the one vital interest that the state exists to maintain. In today's liberal democracies, the mode of production is capitalism, and the citizens consent to it as long as it provides them with a decent quality of life. The mode of production also sustains itself through other superstructures, such as ideological hegemony, meaning that capitalism is seen as inherently natural and therefore doesn't seem to be an ideology at all. But it hasn't always been this way. Liberal democracies in the past have been known to abandon civil liberties in order to contain these threats against capitalism. From Red Scares to COINTELPRO, they will suspend freedom of speech, assembly, and association when they feel it's needed to protect the capitalist system. In extreme cases, when this is not enough, the capitalist ruling class will abandon liberal democracy altogether in favor of fascism, anything to preserve their right to private property. Lastly, another crucial factor is security. In addition to maintaining the support of people within the country, a liberal democratic country has to have confidence that its sovereignty is not threatened by external forces. This carries many of the same dangers as internal threats. If people that are hostile to the government are allowed to openly operate in the country, it places an existential threat to the state's sovereignty, even more so if there is a power imbalance between the two countries. Consider the Second Red Scare and the wildly exaggerated accusations of treason and espionage. What followed was a zealous witch hunt which caused thousands of people to be fired and imprisoned because of their alleged political beliefs. Or consider 9/11. After one day of terrorist attacks against the United States, the government passed the USA Patriot Act, suspending basic legal rights such as habeas corpus and the right to a trial for terror suspects. To this day, the US keeps these people in an illegal torture camp on land stolen from Cuba. Now that we've identified material conditions that influence the style of government of a state, we can more accurately explain why some states are liberal democracies while others aren't. Rather than focusing on ideas which everyone has access to, we can point to material conditions like economic prosperity, industrial diversification, and social stability and security. Of course, not all of these factors are necessarily going to be determinative, but overall this makes it clear why poor third world countries often fall victims to coups and dictatorships, and why even industrial Western countries don't always stay liberal democracies in periods of great turmoil. This is also why fascism and socialism appear to be so similar, even though in fact they're ideologically quite opposite. They come from the same material conditions in the same historical context. In periods of intense class conflict, there can only be two outcomes. Either an open dictatorship of capital in the form of fascism or military rule, or dictatorship of the proletariat that seeks to end class rule once and for all. Or in other words, socialism or barbarism.